All right, and we're live. This is the SE call-in show. So you can call in with a claim or call in if there's something you want to talk about with us. There should be links, coming up right now. So you can just click those and they will allow you to join the stage. And we have several panelists here today. I'm sure you're familiar with them, Juggling Lessons and Gina. And anybody want to introduce themselves in any other form or fashion?
Hi, I'm Juggling Lessons. I like to make videos. Been doing very much for like 10 or 11 months now.
That happened for you too, Gina?
Happy. And producing content again, slowly.
I think part of that cut out for me. Did that cut out for you at all, Gina?
Oh, okay.
So weird buzzing noises.
Yeah, weird buzzing noises? Uh-oh. Hi, I'm Juggling Lessons. I've been making SE content since July of 20 or so, and then I took a big break for a medical hiatus, and now I'm back and working and making new stuff and talking to you. There you are. You.
I think it's got to be a little bit higher, yeah.
Oh, you're right. I was pointing at the wrong person. Okay, so call in, give a talk. I promise not to be unusually mean.
Unusually mean.
Right. Say maybe if this is average mean, I want to be here.
Right there. All right.
On a scale of from there to there.
The golden ratio. Try to get the golden ratio of mean.
Oh, sure.
Or the Goldilocks zone. Sorry, no, the Goldilocks zone of mean.
Not too mean, not too nice. Just a little bit pushy.
Yeah. Okay, yep. It's glad to see everybody in the discussions talking.
Hi, Fenton. Greetings, Rosemary, Morgan. Hi, Clinton.
Are we going to use the Likert scale today? We sure can. We could. I don't have Reed's Miro thing, but we could make something. And really, all we have to do is say, on a scale of 1 to 7, or 0 to 6, or -3 to +3, we could use a Likert scale. We could do that. Okay, does everybody agree to only use Likert scale today?
I'll do my best.
For Clinton.
Sure.
Good. Try to remember. Clinton, if we mess up, call us on it.
So that would be slightly agree, strongly agree, and then the reverse.
Okay. Yeah. Those, neutral and three spots to either side of it.
Disagree, or slightly disagree, and strongly disagree.
Great.
Yeah. And so if anybody wants to do something, we're calling that spectrum SE when we use the scale. And the main difference, I think, with the spectrum SE is that we have multiple people being interviewed at the same time, giving their reasons. The downside that I see is it seems like the reasons are either first or second order, and we don't really get down to third or fourth order reasons. I think that's really good in political discussions, but probably not as useful when talking about like fundamental truths or something. And I could be wrong. Maybe it works really well, and I just haven't seen a good example.
Yeah, I feel like it's trying to. A big issue with it is it's like trying to juggle attentions. So all these people are, that's the hard part is keeping everybody engaged in it. Seems to also be, but I don't think that'll be a problem here. That's a problem in like on the street SE with random people.
So Fenton, if you would like to call in, you can see the link at the top of the list. I'll try to dump it in again. We would love for you to come in and do an SE session. You could do the interviewing if you want us to talk about that role, specifically that Satan is not evil, but an agent of God's will. And I do agree that theists seem to have a very diverse opinion as to the nature of Satan.
Gina, I didn't want to put you on the spot. Did you have anything you wanted to introduce, or?
Not right now.
Okay.
Hi, Gina. I go. Excuse me. I'm a little tickle in my throat. But I go by my initials GG most of the time. I've practicing now for 2 years. I'm undecided about where I want to take this. Mostly, I like to keep it private. So if anybody is interested in conversation but doesn't want to record it or post it anywhere, just hit me up. Let me
Nice.
know.
Private SE. That's pretty
Yeah.
cool. I've
Yeah.
had some profound SE conversations in private because that's one significantly less. What do you call it?
With pressure?
Removal of defenses.
Yeah.
Yeah, to having privacy seems really, really good. Okay, Fenton is talking about Elaine Pagel's view about Satan. I don't know specifically. I'm not sure I'd recognize Elaine Pagel's view on it.
I
But
don't know either.
are both of you ex-theists?
Yes.
Okay.
I am.
Okay.
I think Gina's too.
Gina, you can tell me.
Yes.
When you first knew about Satan, what was your view of Satan? Can you paragraph that?
Ooh. My view of Satan was that he was someone who existed to deceive humans and tempt them or dissuade them from following what God wanted us to do.
Okay. So Satan was a direct antagonist of God's plan. Okay. And I assume some kind of limited power that's, has a lot of power, but has to follow a strangely rigid set of rules. Something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Quayd?
Yeah, I think it's pretty similar. Yep. Antagonistic. Yep. I think my view of him changed, in the like mythical sense when I started to be less theist.
Mm-hmm.
And I had heard, I think as a Christian, I had heard people start to say like, God or Satan only really becomes an antagonist in like later interpretations of certain scripture.
Mm-hmm.
But certainly in the Old Testament and before those interpretations, Satan was seen as more of an ally of God or just doing God's bidding and will.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
That he was supposed to be, and he was designed to be an antagonist.
Yeah.
And there was no beef between him and God.
Not fallen, but actually intended from the beginning.
Right.
That's different than what I had been taught.
Yeah, and I think it has to do with maybe his name, even like that's just what he was called. So it wasn't
Lucifer,
an adversary.
Talking about Satan or Hasatan?
I honestly can't remember, but whatever means adversary, the word that translates to adversary.
Satan.
I think that's Satan.
Satan, yeah, and that not being seen as like necessarily an adversary of God, but an adversary to humans.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
And that he was kind of like the opposing lawyer. He was more like the opposing lawyer than he was like him and God had beef or something like that. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I remember somebody bringing that up and being like, that's interesting and new. And
yeah.
Hello, Tyler.
Hold three fingers up for me.
Me? Oh, I see.
My bad. I was trying to see if I can get this on speaker because my headset.
It sounds good. You sound good to us. So let me finish with Fenton. So I think Fenton is reporting Elaine Pagel's position. She basically said that Satan was a type of resistance that allowed people's faith to grow through tribulations, like adding weight to an exercise to make the muscle stronger. That is a novel idea of Satan that I had not seen before. That's interesting. Very cool. Tyler, what would you like to bring?
So I have a claim I'd like to try with you guys.
Mm-hmm.
So my claim is the use of more than one pronoun or more than the two gender binary pronouns encourages gender stereotypes or greatly fosters them.
Fosters gender stereotypes.
Yes.
And this is as opposed to if we didn't use, we only used two.
No, I'm saying anything beyond the two traditional gender stereotypes.
Okay.
When you get into the spectrum and the non-binary and all that, I feel like it's rooted in and it fosters gender stereotypes.
Okay, so I think the claim is that if we have more than two gender stereotypes, more than two gender pronouns, it encourages gender stereotypes. Whereas if we only have two gender pronouns, that would maintain the status quo or perhaps discourage.
If you only have the two, it wouldn't necessarily decrease the stereotypes or increase them, but we can actually deal with the stereotypes. The gender pronouns, from what I gather, are rooted in stereotypes. Like, what's it feel like to be a woman? Like, how would you define a woman, etc.? All that is based on stereotypical or subjective views.
So is being a man, right? It's not gender.
No, because like I could be a man and be into things that people associate with women. And so if we only had the two pronouns, like in the past, I grew up in the 70s, 80s. You know, that was what feminists did, was to break down those stereotypes. Like, I'm a woman, I'm happy to be an engineer.
In the bras, you know, use a job with a drill.
Right. Like all those stereotypes, that's what we were working to defeat. And now it feels like with a lot of issues that those are being re-entrenched just with a different perspective.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you think it would be okay to add to the claim that like use of more than two genders foster stereotypes more than just having the two genders would. I think maybe we ended up in a place we've already talked about, but
yeah, like I feel like it's man, I wish there was a way to phrase it where I just want to be clear. I'm not asserting that only using the two would defeat these stereotypes. I just feel like using more than two adds to those stereotypes.
Okay. Is there anything negative about adding to stereotypes?
About adding to yeah. I mean, not inherently, but you know, specific to that specific area, I feel like it's negative. I don't want my daughter to grow up thinking she has to act a certain way or do certain things, and then if she doesn't, then she's not a woman. Like, there's already enough confusion growing up, you know.
Okay, so the use of more than two gender pronouns fosters and adds to gender stereotypes.
Yes.
Okay.
That's my claim.
Okay. Could you elaborate on some of these stereotypes that you see that are added, that aren't there, or that are kind of added when we use more than two?
Yeah, like I just alluded to an example. Like, I'll hear these kids who are embracing this stuff say things like, I'm non-binary because my brain doesn't think like a man or think like a woman. And like, if they elaborate, like, what's it mean to think like a man or think like a woman? I don't see any other possibility except linking these stereotypes to it.
Okay. Yeah, I think one thing that I was confused on that I think I understand better now is it's not so much that it adds new stereotypes, but it kind of intensifies the stereotypes.
Yeah, that's a better way of saying it. It kind of like, it gives, like, if a Christian, you know, like one of these theists, like New Earth creationist types were talking about these roles, like everybody's already kind of programmed to understand that and reject it. But when it comes from the quote unquote social justice side of things and it's not clearly expressed, it's like a Trojan horse for these ideas, in my opinion.
Okay.
What if somebody had some gender stereotypes in one direction and some gender stereotypes in the other direction?
Yeah, I don't have an issue with people, like, say I'm a man, I'm not this way, but say I was completely naturally masculine and only did what those things. I don't have an issue with that. I just have an issue with people claiming that that's what it means to be a man, or that's what it means to be a woman. I feel like people should be free to do what they want. I don't even have an issue if people want to use these pronouns. I just don't like the whole mentality behind it, or the ideas that it's built on.
You might have already said reasons and things, but I want to give an opportunity to flesh the reasons out behind here. Can you give me a reason or an example of that happening, where somebody, so one person in a group says, okay, I'm not he or she now, I'm they, and I would all call me they, and I want you to stop treating me like a whatever gender you thought I was, and not start treating me like the other gender that you didn't think I was. In what, can you flesh it out for me, how that
flesh out
changes,
what's wrong with that?
Yeah, how that changes things for anybody else besides,
okay, so the way it would change it,
call a new name or a pronoun.
Sure. So so obviously there's no there's not like a black and white to this. It's not like I'm sure you could point out plenty of outliers, or maybe even what I'm going to bring up will be an outlier, but it's a very real potential.
I think your claim,
so I just wanted to state that up front.
Not an everything, right?
Yeah, but where it creates a problem, and we see it right now, is, for example, we'll have kids that are going through puberty. They're confused. You have some of these teachers, I'm not making any claims as to how many, what percentage, but fostering that confusion and say, oh, maybe you should think about, are you really a girl? And then in some cases it leads to them taking puberty blocking drugs, or even going through with surgeries when it may not have been necessary.
Okay.
That's an extreme example, but that's one.
I think because now we're talking about surgeries, and prior we were just saying somebody declaring, like, maybe they get a new name, maybe they get a new pronoun, and maybe they change some aspects of their presentation. Like if I were to do that, I'd probably have to use the beard, right? Would we agree?
That was a fair point. I'll address it specific to the pronouns.
Okay, thanks.
So here's a way that's potentially not a good thing, is someone says, don't treat exactly what you said, right? I don't see how it's even possible, but don't treat me like a man, or don't treat me like a woman. I'm not with either, right? And then, like, say someone walks into that and they're just acting intuitively, and then they're accused of being a bigot because, oh, you did this and that's treat me like a man, or maybe they used the wrong pronoun and they're called a bigot, or they just disagree with the person. So that's a problem.
People going through a transition like that get really porcupine-y. They get really sensitive about the question. And I'm only good. I'm practiced. I try like fuck to do the right pronouns, and I still get it wrong 10% of the time. And
yeah, I mean, it's unnecessary.
It happens. You're gonna you're gonna touch the porcupine. So then what?
Yeah, it can be like, people have trouble remembering people's names. So
yeah,
and it's like there is some offense taken to that, but it's understandable because
why
is somebody supposed to have perfect memory?
Oh,
it's understandable. We don't remember people's names, and we're not immediate.
Right.
Yeah. So like why?
Oh, you forgot my name, so I hate you completely now. It's more just like obviously we would like for people to remember our names, but if we don't, that person might have a disability that makes it difficult for them to recall certain things. And it's where there's certain sort of a grace given there, so to speak.
Or what about the common thing? I mean, I still do it. Like you're talking to a group of coworkers or family members, it's mixed gender or sex or whatever, and you go, hey guys, or and like now this is like silly things like that are
some people think guys are gender and some people don't. But I don't, and unfortunately sometimes I'm in a group who does, and I go, oh, okay, with you people I will.
That was a good Freudian slip there. There's a good yeah.
If someone's called they, how does that even make them? I don't buy the claim. I'll just be honest. I mean, I'm open to being proven wrong, But I don't, and I'm talking about non-binary right now, because I know there's people with genuine gender dysphoria, and I can see how
non-binary, agender, someone who says that I'm not clearly one or the other.
Yeah, all this Zers kind of stuff. Like, does that the claim is that if you don't use that it causes harm and it messes them up? But I'm not buying that. Like, how does saying Z or Zer or they or them make anyone feel any better about themselves?
May I assume that you are cisgender male?
I'm a male, yes.
Yes, and
I don't buy the whole
probably
cisgender nonsense.
Something like that, right?
What's that?
So I assume your pronouns are like he, him.
Yeah, if I have to declare pronoun, yeah.
I mean, if I said he, him, that would not surprise you.
Correct.
It would.
I don't think it surprised anybody until about 5 minutes ago.
You know, she called up, and that bitch did this, and that's and so on and so forth. And I said,
you know, in my world.
Yeah, am I talking about you?
Like, I wouldn't intuitively pick it up that way, but I think what you're saying is if someone quote unquote misgendered me, would that bother me?
And if they did it often, I think too is something else to consider.
Yeah,
I think
especially if you asked a bunch of times. I mean, but still, I don't need to press the point. It's just, is there any negative effect on you if I say, you know, Tyler, she did the thing with the thing with the thing?
Not really. I mean, it would piss me off because it's obviously done in a way to be intentionally insulting, like when you call a dude the B word. Right?
So it's the intentional. It's the intentionality. Like then is the
but here's the difference: is until about 5 minutes ago, like 99.9% of people did that because there was a link to gender and sex. The only thing that's changed is people are trying to
called men bitches.
Separate that. No, I mean, if someone put it this way, if someone looks like a man and I say he, how's that offensive? If they say, "Oh, I'm actually not a he," and then I continue to do it, then I understand that.
Okay. So when I was growing up, the 30s, you know, the 80s or something, they didn't misgender me. They proclaimed that I was a homosexual. They used an F word. For YouTube reasons, I'm not going to spell it all out. But and that would be thrown at me by people who wished to, you know, count coup on me socially or something like that, as quite regularly. I think it was their intent to hurt me with a really tiny H that might add up to a lot of hurts.
Sure.
How I took it separate from the question. I just mean that I think their intent was a tiny hurt.
Right. But do you think it's anyone's intent to hurt somebody when they see someone that looks like a female and they say she?
No. Yeah, I would say not necessarily at all, but it's like there's a difference between, I do agree with you that like if you find out someone's true intentions, best practice, if you know that they had your best intentions in mind and weren't trying to like take away rights or hurt you in any way, that your feelings would correspond to, like, they would lend to or go on the positive side. But I also understand, like, for instance, nobody's ever confused me for a female, but if I was borderline, like if I had qualities that someone might ascribe
I know what you mean.
as a female, and I'm meeting someone new, and this has been like a sensitive topic for me, like the fact that I had those qualities and someone labeled me that, I might just have a knee-jerk offense because that's something I'm insecure about. And I would understand that. Right. I would understand that.
Naturally androgynous. And
when I was in high school, I had long hair and I was in a grocery store and someone said, "Excuse me, ma'am," from behind. And like, I'm not going to lie, that kind of bothered me.
Oh, yeah, that's actually happened to me before too. Yeah, and there was just a little bit of, you know.
But would you conflate the two? I don't think they're the same issue, though.
I don't think they are the same issue, but my only point was to address the idea.
For my trans friends, it's totally the same issue, and it's magnified.
But it's not, though.
It's not what?
How is it the same issue? Because if somebody, for example, I mean, I'm sure there's the spectrum, but there's people who change it from day to day. So how can it have any inherent?
Well, just really quick, I think we need to
change it on a regular basis. That could be a totally separate discussion, and they are in the vast minority, I think. And I think I'm messaging right now.
I think we need to
going to stop.
figure out.
Okay, so non-binary. Let's use that. Let's stick to non-binary.
Just real quick. Sorry,
Okay.
this needs to be addressed because I'm not sure and maybe we are, and I'm the one that's off the page, but I'm not sure if we're on the same page about what the issues are that we're talking about here, and what's different between those issues. Because to me, I thought that the issue was there's a difference between somebody who has the intention to say something to harm you and be offended by that, and somebody who's offended,
someone who makes an honest mistake, and someone's feelings are hurt by it.
And you still might be offended, but those two things are separate because intention is the separate thing there. Is that what we're talking about by the difference between those two issues, or did I miss it?
Yeah, there's all kinds of issues in there, but yeah, I agree with you on all that. Like, I think intent has a lot to do with it.
I just want to be clear.
What about the non-binary? So, like, how's the use of improper pronouns with someone who's non-binary? How in any way can that genuinely affect someone? Because no one's ever been called Zer.
Well, how about we just stick with they? They covers non-binary, yes?
Yeah, so there's they, but there's all types of these non-binary pronouns, right? Or even they.
I think they draw from different languages and non-gender specific pronouns in different languages.
I guess what I'm getting at,
it doesn't specify. What I'm curious about, Tyler, if we could return to SE here, is how sure are you of this?
The initial claim?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, I'm
on a scale of course 7. That's the rule today.
Oh yeah, I forgot.
On a scale of
1 to 7, 7 being you feel extremely strong about this. 6.5.
6.5. Okay.
What's your main reason for that?
Because my main reason for it is exactly what the people who are pushing it say. The people that are starting this whole thing, their explanation of the need for it is just what gives me the confidence.
It hurts them when they're misgendered? Is that what they say?
No, I'm talking about. The initial claim was about creating entrenching stereotypes.
Yeah, so the original claim is the use of more than 2 gender pronouns fosters and intensifies gender stereotypes.
Right. So when I hear them making the claim that I don't feel like a woman because I'm into X, Y, and Z, that's the evidence for my confidence.
It's because it's right. Yeah.
Okay. So the thesis is its own reason.
All right. No, I mean it's literally what's being said that I don't play with dolls, so I don't feel like a girl.
Mm-hmm.
It's the fact that people bring up gender norms.
So you're thinking about like what people generally associate with like girlish behavior, like dolls, makeup, cooking, baking, cleaning, keeping house, that sort of thing, versus sports cars, and trucks and toys for the boys, sort of thing.
Right, like they're literally, it's literally based on the same stereotypes. I mean, what's really the difference between that and like back in the day when a grumpy right-wing parent would be like, "Oh, stop acting like a girl" to their son if the son's not doing what he wants? What's the difference? In thought.
That was the conformity people were yelling at me when they called me the F word, was that I was not gender conforming to their expectations because some small parts of me were different than what they expected.
And I would know.
Yeah, and that's a different topic too, because homosexuality is real.
An important topic
differences because of the differences in your view between what we think of as gender expectations or gender stereotypes and what another culture might view the same, because the roles might be reversed. Are you aware of any of that?
Yeah, I mean, well, I'm aware that there's instances of that. It's blown out of proportion because most other cultures would have the same feelings I do. I mean, there's literally cultures that have gendered language, like Spanish, Arabic, right?
Sure. English.
But regardless of all that, my opinion is I'm still have the same principles. Whether it was back in the 80s when the liberals agreed with me that that's wrong, or whether it's now, or whether I don't care like who's using the stereotypes, if they're right wing or left wing. I'm against all that. I just think you can do what you want, you know, even if you feel the need to change your sex once you're an adult. I'm fully supportive of all that. What I don't agree with is the ideology behind all this and the stereotypes.
Okay. One thing that I am noting, and I'm not saying that this difference is like significant or that it's exact, but one thing that I do note between what the first example you gave of kind of like earlier gendering, let's say, and kind of the later one is the earlier one had to do with you ascribing a gender to a different person, whereas now a person is ascribing a gender to themselves and asking.
But it's
that
based
other
on the same idea, right?
I know. But that is a difference for me, though. I would say those are different.
Idea to make it non-binary. That's the
Yeah,
difference.
technically, it's a difference for me too.
Versus a scale, or even a scale that could be measured in different ways from different perspectives.
But back to what he said, it was interesting. He said he sees them as the same thing, and I'd actually agree that it's the same, or that there's a difference. But here's where it becomes the same. As soon as that person is forcing me and society to conform and agree to those ideas, now it's ascribing it to other people again.
I would agree that's another difference as well. I do agree with that. So the information, like I think, like the reasoning here is basically then, and let me know if I'm wrong, but because people who are working with more than two genders bring up gender norms so often in their description, then the use of more than two gender pronouns fosters gender stereotypes.
Basically, except
there. Okay.
Except I'm asserting that it's completely based on these quote unquote gender norms. I mean, they wouldn't have the need to do it if they didn't take gender norms so seriously.
Anybody have any further questions before I jump to hypotheticals?
Go ahead, Dali.
Thank you. So I'd like to ask, this is like the complex, difficult, reachy question.
Okay.
This is something that is hypothetically you don't know today. It's not a reason you have now. It's something you could learn in the future.
Okay.
That would move your confidence up and down on the scale. I usually am thinking about two different things. You can address up or down in your order.
Okay. So are you asking me to give like a falsifiability to it, or
what would increase your confidence that the claim that you made is true?
Thing. Something you have to make.
Okay, so nothing would really increase my confidence.
That would move you.
Nothing would really increase my confidence. The only reason I said 6.5 instead of 7 is because I am open to evidence, but I can't imagine any evidence that would change my mind to be more confident.
Okay, what about decrease?
That's difficult. They would have to, I can't think of an example because I don't believe there is one, but I would say they'd have to logically, coherently give me evidence to the contrary, not use circular logic or avoid answering questions.
I can offer a hypothetical that might address, tell me if this matters.
Okay.
So imagine that there's a state in the union or a country in the place, or there's something like that, where they very much adopted, so there's actually two of them. One of them very much adopted only using two pronouns. And then the other one, they very much adopted using 3 or more or something. Maybe this is left coast, right coast thing. Who knows?
Okay.
But you're able to see a bit of society operate for 10 years under that. And then we were to measure something about gender stereotypes in those populations. Could that increase your confidence if it went the way you expected?
I get what you're saying.
Yeah, like if they were using,
because I'm pretty confident in it already. It could decrease my confidence.
So it would more easily
Okay.
decrease your confidence than increase it, even if you saw confirmatory natural experiment.
Well, like I said, I'm already basically 100% confident. I mean, it logically makes sense, but so there's not really anyone can do to increase my confidence in that assertion. The only thing that could decrease it, and I don't know how you would correlate the evidence and determine like what causal, but if they showed that, say, California passed all these laws, like it's illegal to, like they went full board, right? And then all of a sudden we saw a decrease in these stereotypes. I don't know how you would measure that, but if someone could show me, like evidence that I'm confident in that proves otherwise, then I could lower my confidence in my assertion.
Yeah. Well, yeah. What about like one thing I'm thinking is like a definitive like ascription to certain genders based off of male and stereotypically male and female kind of characteristics. So like if there's two countries and one of them basically has the male female binary, and the other country, most people see it on a spectrum, and I'm looking at how people are speaking in those two countries, and again, this is just one way to measure it, but every time they talk about gender, they end up going back to the binary anyway, and doing it more than the country that is only using two genders, the male and female gender. That might increase my confidence. But if I'm seeing the reverse, if I'm seeing in a country where there's a spectrum, people are less likely to ascribe certain features to male and females, that would decrease my confidence that this claim is true.
Okay, I'm mostly there with you.
Yeah, even though that's just one. That would be one one way to measure it. It would be just language. And I'm sure
here's the only flaw I see in that.
Yeah.
So if a country that completely embraced this, like say that circumstance happened, I think that there'd be great confusion as to like it's basically taking away the meaning of those words. So I could see the use of those words going down in those circumstances, but that doesn't mean that the stereotypes went down.
Well, maybe we'll make you the czar of stereotype management, and you can figure out what the.
No, I'm not trying to manage anything.
It's your claim, so you can help define what stereotypes mean. Thank you very much, Tyler, for bringing
have
this.
a good day. Thanks.
This is great. I want to give you extra kudos and points for being willing to talk about such a third rail scary issue.
I want to thank you for letting me.
Yeah, I think this shows the strength of SE is that we can talk about things that people pull their hair out and scream and bang the walls,
right?
And manage to hear
Not
each other
hate each other for it.
Yeah.
And there's a benefit to just hearing each other out, no matter even if anybody can change their mind even the slightest bit.
I agree.
Yeah,
it's good to be able to talk about something and be okay with disagreeing.
Yeah.
All right. Have a good one.
Yeah, you too, Tyler.
Thank you, Tyler.
Okay, that was fun.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I'm glad you got to the scale, Gina. I was trying desperately to get back there, but it was difficult. Yeah, I think we covered a lot of bases there. That was good.
Yeah. I'll tell you, defining terms was a lot right there, and it was very easy to fall into the groove, into like we're bowling down a narrow alley and there's a gutter on each side of more complex claims that have a lot more I don't know, gutter ballness, stuck off the main claim easily and hard to get back to it. Because we were talking about something kind of nuanced and specific.
Yeah, I think the scale and between Gina bringing up the scale and Dali, you bringing up the what would increase and decrease your confidence, those I think are just like so valuable in tools.
Mm-hmm. Asking how, you're totally welcome to call in and
sure.
You're saying extend the convo and whether it's your position or not, steelmen are very welcome. Just to define steelman in this case, it's the ability to argue from another's position without straw manning.
making the strongest and most charitable interpretation of someone else's argument.
Hey, what's up?
Okay.
Hey,
For holding up fingers.
Sorry, go ahead, Gina.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Welcome, CK. Did you have a thing you wanted to bring?
no, not really.
Cool.
Just saw you guys were on, and this is a good time for me. Thought
Yeah,
I'd join
excellent. So now we have 4 panelists.
you.
Now
I caught the end of the previous conversation. It sounded pretty interesting.
you have feedback? You want to drop in on that?
I'm not sure if I got enough of it. What was the claim?
That using more than 2 gender pronoun sets would inevitably lead to increasing the prevalence and nastiness and negativity about gender stereotypes.
Yeah.
Hello,
Right,
Justin. Welcome,
Guys.
welcome. Hello there.
Hello.
Hey, Justin.
Nice to talk to y'all.
Thank you.
You too.
Which thing would you like to bring? Do you want to continue along with along the same path?
Yeah. I have thoughts about this, and it's actually hard to get a good conversation on the subject with people who agree or disagree, because it's very difficult for people to talk openly about.
I'm very happy to be doing it over video so that the hammers are it's safer. In the worst case, it can shit.
Yeah, I totally understand. Mostly, I wanted to kind of further, I think, not exactly the claim that Tyler had. I think an underlying assumption in what he was saying that I'm very interested in exploring, and it might be more me requesting counter factuals or counter evidence from you guys than
You may interview us. You may drive.
Yeah, that's not exactly what I want to do, though. So I would like to put forward a claim, and then ask you guys to take it apart as best you can, or at least my confidence in it. So I think this is probably more on a reasoning side than an evidence side in my case.
Okay, give us a claim and then ask us what, and then tell us how to address it.
Well, address it how you wish. The claim is I think that the concept of gender identity relies on gender stereotypes.
Sure.
I'm maybe like 90% on that.
Okay, so the concept of gender identity relates to things that are part of gender stereotypes, and
not relates. Is the concept is foundational?
It's okay. Gender stereotypes are foundational too. So just definitionally, kind of like dicing it. So if there was something that was part of a gender stereotype back in the past but isn't today, are we only working from today's set of stereotypes?
I think we could be a bit flexible on it, but for the most part, yeah.
Okay. Does anybody else have any definitional questions?
See, concept. No, I think maybe. No, I think I understand it pretty well.
Okay.
So a next one might be what would increase and decrease your confidence in the claim? Like information, hypothetically speaking, can you think of any information that if you found it, let's start with increase, it would increase your confidence?
If I could receive an definition, perhaps, of what gender identity is, that is one.
Justin, something in your audio is fading out like you were just going, whoa.
Oh, I'm sorry. Hopefully this will be a bit better. I just pulled the mic a bit closer.
That sounds great.
Thank you.
So say whatever you said again, because I only got the first half.
Yeah, no problem. If I could receive a definition of gender identity that was that wasn't circular and didn't rely on sex stereotypes, that also comported with the way that people tend to use it, I would go up here. Big part of this is I'm searching for a good definition. I don't think I have. I think what I put forward is the best one, but I would love to hear a better one.
Can you tell us, maybe by definition or maybe by example, how you would describe stereotype in this context?
Sure. In this context, at least, I don't necessarily want to say that a stereotype is by definition bad, but something that's more a societal perception of how a person acts or behaves. That's probably about as good as I could get based on typically their sex or gender.
It's primarily actions and behavior. How much is visual? And maybe that's behavior because I could shave my beard or not, and maybe that's a behavior.
Sure, but I would consider that to be a behavior. Yeah. Okay. I would not.
My beard is a gender stereotype. Is that right?
Your choice to comport a beard when you have the pro one. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
Do we say we said behaviors, appearance? I feel like there's another one that I missed when I was writing.
It's really mostly behaviors. Truthfully, maybe we could include in there things that don't always manifest as behaviors, like
thoughts. Maybe
people tend to enjoy certain types of things or preferences. Those kinds of things could be included as well.
Great.
So mostly thinking about kind of non-physiological aspects of a person.
A preference for monster trucks versus Barbie dolls?
Sure. The children versus boys, people versus things. A lot of them.
Okay. Let's see.
Do we talk about decrease?
Yeah. What would decrease your confidence?
Oh, I think I might have stated it backwards, actually. But
that's what I thought you did. Yeah.
Yeah. But I guess what would make me more certain that this is the definition or the most appropriate definition? I don't know. An adequate analysis to find that gender has no. Imagine we can map out kind of where our thoughts are in the brain and stuff like that. And all the things that we find to be innate about ourselves, we can like literally locate them. Okay. Just imagine we could. And then we run that and we find it to be a reliable method to come to those conclusions. And we do that for people's gender and we find that, hey, that doesn't exist. That might be something that would point me in the direction of even further believing this to be the truth.
Okay.
I don't know if this is another claim or if this question may help our progress in your claim. So would you say stereotyping is inherent to social categorization?
Yeah.
So imagine there was a woman back, several decades back who wanted to do a man's job that was stereotypically a man's job. Was she acting across gender lines? Was she taking on a gender identity that was different or not hers or something?
In my opinion, no. I share that kind of view with Tyler. I think she's acting in a way that does not conform to the stereotypes in some manner, but it does not another gender.
Okay.
Truthfully, in this case, it's
What-
because
what if
I'm
she
not certain that the
uses,
concept should be.
Just an initial dot and a last name in order to blind her potential employer to her gender.
Sorry, could you say that again?
So what if she just uses first name, initial, last name to blind her employer to her gender? Now is she?
I think I'm missing something about.
If she's trying to create, like, obfuscate what her
Sure.
actual gender is through getting the job, is that some way her starting to identify as something like kind of opposite to how she might identify? Is that it, Dali, or did I miss?
Yeah. This is the question. I'm basically this is the outsider test for stereotypes and how stereotypes affect things, using past history that is recent enough to be in our memory. I'm actually thinking about a specific example that is my husband's mother, but that's not important. Just to say that there is a real person in this story.
So, is the question: Would someone doing that make them somebody part of another gender?
Well, would they be expressing, transgender or crossing gender? Maybe I'm off the mark about the claim. This seemed to matter when I thought about it, but now that I'm not sure if I'm on the mark at all.
I mean, I think that's maybe a good practice in general for hiring. I'm for blinded hiring, but to me it doesn't help me solidify whether or not my concept or lack of belief in the concept.
Oh, you're cutting
Stronger
out
or less strong.
All right. Yeah, there's still a little of the effect going on where parts of what you say will be cut off.
Okay, from the audience, how does creating new pronouns and genders help with real life issues like a sexist boss? Is that in line enough with your claim to be a relevant question?
Oh boy. I guess somewhere under my claim is probably also are these is the concept of gender useful? So I think that question might help with that aspect of it. Could you bring up that statement again?
How does creating new pronouns and genders help with real life issues like a sexist boss?
My thoughts is it probably doesn't help.
Okay. We just had a new guest pop in. Justin, may I throw you on the panel and throw them in as the front? Welcome, Dr. McClatchy. I'm not hearing you.
Oh, I apologize. How are you doing?
Okay, there you go. You had double muted. I know all about that.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Excellent.
I'm quite familiar with you. I don't know if the rest of the panel or the audience is. Would you like to introduce yourself or something like that?
Sure. I'm an assistant professor of biology. I work at a Christian school in Boston, Massachusetts called Sattler College. So my PhD is in biology. I'm also fascinated with biblical scholarship, and I'm a Christian apologist. I do a lot of work, particularly on the New Testament and arguments for the resurrection and the identity of Jesus and that kind of thing.
Peter from the audience asked what we are all asking. Do you have a claim per chance? Is that what you'd like to bring as a claim? You're welcome to do other
Sure.
things.
Yeah, I mean, we could talk about the claim that Jesus rose from the dead or something along those lines if you would like.
As you like.
Okay.
You get to pick. You're
Sure.
the interviewee. You make your favorite claim. And
Sure,
we're going to ask
we can
That
go
might
for
be
that.
it.
first and second and third level and try to get down to your epistemologies and how you choose reasons and process things and confidences and hypotheticals.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm familiar with straight epistemology, so yeah, we can do that.
Yes.
Is Jesus rose from the dead? Is that a good enough claim that we could explore? Okay.
Right, exactly.
How confident are you that the claim is true?
I would say that I'm very confident that it's true. Somewhat akin to the proposition that, say, Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon, or that he was assassinated in the Forum, or something like that. These would be, for me, parallel historical claims.
Okay, and I already messed up because we're supposed to be using the 1 to 7 scale. So scale from 1 to 7, how confident would 7 being the highest confidence you could have?
Yeah, I mean, I would usually want such a scale to be calibrated. So, I mean, so for example, where would you?
The middle of that scale is neutral, and it goes from strongly disagree to agree. This comes from an inside joke that we were asked earlier to use the Likert scale. So today we're using only the Likert scale, just because somebody asked nice. Go for it.
So as I said, I don't normally like a numerical scale because it needs to be calibrated. That's why I like to give a parallel historical claim, which I think enjoys a similar level of evidential support. But I mean, if I had to...
Okay, if I could interrupt, I'm sorry. Would it help to compare it to something like, how sure are you that you exist? Or that we're having this conversation?
I'm 100% sure that I exist. I'm somewhat less sure that they're having this conversation, but still certain beyond a reasonable doubt.
Okay.
And I would be somewhat less confident with historical claims such as the resurrection. So I would argue that I'm very confident that Jesus rose from the dead, but I'm not certain in the deductive sense of the term. But put it this way, I'm not losing sleep over whether I'm wrong.
All right, very good. So that helps. So the one thing I think we can agree on with absolute certainty is that we exist, and everything comes up against that. So, in comparison, like how certain are you on the same scale that Jesus rose from the dead?
As I said, I'm very confident to the point that I don't lose sleep over it, but I'm not 100% sure. I'm not as certain of that proposition as I am with the proposition that, say, I exist, or that 2 + 2 = 4, or things that we know with certainty to be true. I mean, I give comparisons intentionally because I think it's more helpful to compare claims with other claims. So when it comes to something like Julius Caesar crossing the Rubicon, or Julius Caesar being assassinated in the Forum, or something along those lines, that would be, for me, of a similar level of evidential support that we're dealing with when it comes to Jesus' resurrection.
Okay, yeah, I hate to belabor the point, so I apologize if it comes off as that. But you said 100% that you exist, and so there is that scale there. Would you say that you're in the 90s? You said you're not 100% confident, but are you in the 90% realm in confidence?
Yeah, I mean, I'd probably say more than 99%.
Gotcha. Okay.
Reasons? Cool.
Reasons. You want me to give my reasons now?
Yeah, give me some reasons, especially like the best one. Or best 3 if that's helpful.
So when we come to study the Gospels and Acts in the New Testament, I would argue, and I'm happy to defend this if need be, that they are documents that are composed by individuals who are well-informed, who are close up to the facts, and who are habitually scrupulous. That being the case, then we have justification for thinking that these statements in the Gospels and Acts concerning the nature and variety of the post-resurrection encounters with the risen Jesus actually reflects what was being asserted by those who are purportedly eyewitnesses of Jesus' resurrection. And when anyone makes any sort of testimonial claim, there are essentially 3 and only 3 broad explanatory categories that could purport to explain why they made the claim. One is that they're correct, one is that they're honestly mistaken, and one is that they are lying. And when you look at the nature of the claims that we find in the Gospels concerning the resurrection, we find that they are polymodal or multisensory in nature, involving not just individual sightings from a distance or something like that, but rather group conversations with Jesus, physical contact with Jesus, eating with Jesus on more than one occasion, long discourses with Jesus, according to Acts 1 to 16, across 40 days, and so forth. So it's not the sort of thing about which one could be honestly mistaken about. And then when you look at the context of the apostolic claim, and you find there's a context of persecution that the apostles voluntarily endured against their own self-interests, labors and dangers and sufferings and persecutions and in some cases martyrdom on account of their testimony that Christ was raised from the dead. And that goes a long way towards establishing their sincerity in making that claim. And so by significantly reducing the plausibility of those two competing explanations, namely that the apostles lied or that they were honestly mistaken, you in turn redistribute the probabilities such that the most likely or best explanation of the data is in fact Jesus rose from the dead.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to try to summarize what you just said, and I ask you and the panel to fill in anything I miss. So, multiple people who are known to be scrupulous and honest made a series of claims that agree with each other. They're polymodal. They have different sensory situations. There's a significant diversity of the experience that they report. And you're able to rule out lying or honestly mistaken. I think lying because there's more than one of them and they are known to be honest, and mistaken because polymodality. So it's truish, or you conclude that it's true by deduction. Am I close?
Yeah. So it's when it comes to their sincerity, one argument, there's several arguments, but the argument I used in my previous remarks were that the apostles were willing to voluntarily endure persecution and suffering, and in some cases martyrdom, on account of their testimony. And multi-party conspiracies, when life or liberty are at stake, have a tendency to break down. So that goes a long way towards establishing their sincerity in making that claim. And I would present the argument more probabilistically or inductively rather than deductively. I don't think that this argument proves in a mathematical sense the resurrection, but I think that the resurrection is the best explanation of the data.
Okay, to try to paraphrase, I think you're trying to get to the most likely explanation for what people said in the historical accounts. You're ruling out that the disciples lied, the apostles lied. And you then proceeded to try to justify, ruling out whether or not they were telling the truth. What's the most likely explanation? I think you were leaning more towards that they were sincere in their accounts because of the risk that it brought from those around them, from the culture at the time, of possible, persecution, you said, and that lends credibility in your opinion. Is that correct?
Essentially, right.
Okay. I guess the next question I want to ask is, can a person be sincere in what they say and still be mistaken?
Absolutely. But we have to look at the particulars of the case to find out whether that is a good explanation of this particular claim. And as I said, when we look at the nature and variety of the resurrection encounters that we find in the Gospels, we find that they're the sort of testimonial claims about which it's difficult to be honestly mistaken about. To give a parallel example, imagine that you have a claimant who asserts that she was sexually assaulted, and she gives a detailed description of the person that assaulted her, gives a detailed description of the encounter itself. It's the sort of claim that's about which it's very difficult to be honestly mistaken. And so then you would want to evaluate, okay, is she making this up or is she telling us the truth? And so I do think that the nature of the claim can carry evidential value as far as our assessment of whether someone can be plausibly honestly mistaken. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think so. And what other evidence do people take besides just a word of mouth? Like, we can trust that she believes that she had this she believes that she had this experience, and we want to look into it and take her seriously. What other evidence do we take in pursuing that kind of case?
Do you mean evidence that shows that this really was the testimony of the apostles, or what do you mean by that?
Well, similar experience, like I guess in the example of the sexual assault, it's not only her word alone that we're going on, but we're taking DNA samples, we're looking for other physical evidence, scratches, defensive marks, that sort of thing. So we're
Right,
corroborating her word with something
Right.
else. What other
Yeah.
something else are you using?
Yeah, and that would be a preferable situation if you're able to do that. If someone makes the sexual assault allegation very shortly after the assault allegedly happened, that's very, very helpful. But I think that, I mean, there is a whole discipline of forensic statement analysis where detectives are examining statements from many years, even decades ago. This is the case, for example, in cold case homicide detection investigation. And so testimony is a form of evidence, and I think that
Sure.
I mean, if the individual concerned is coming forward about this alleged sexual assault and is doing so against her own self-interests, that bodes favorably for her credibility as far as being sincere in making that claim. And then if we look at the nature of what she is claiming and find that it's a sort of claim that's very difficult to be honestly mistaken about, that makes the best explanation that the hypothesis that in fact she was, she's making the claim because she in fact was sexually assaulted in the way that she described.
Yeah, I think I tend to want to believe that too. I think the question I'm getting is more like what we're not only using her word, we're taking her word as yes, this probably happened, but we want to look into it more.
Yeah, I think that's also what I'm thinking about now is, you know, we would certainly believe that something occurred and that she was raped. I would not on that necessarily be convinced that who she's identified as a rapist was correct. I would need more details and corroborating evidence. I would believe an event happened, and most likely she was raped, but I also know that there are a lot of misidentifications, and that's where the corroborating evidence would really have to start to play in heavily for me.
You'd have a stronger case, though, if she says that the individual who raped her was someone who was a close acquaintance of hers, perhaps a family member or something like that. Then it's much more difficult for her to just plausibly misremember who it was or give an incorrect identification. So I think that is relevant. And when it comes to, say, the resurrection, we have a testimony from individuals who had been with Jesus as a close companion and friend for 3 years. And so so my colleague, Dr. Timothy McGrew, likes to give this analogy. I mean, consider, think back to a time in high school when you had a good friend, and think of a particular day when you were hanging out with this friend, perhaps over lunch or doing some activity with them. Now, can you testify under oath that that was in fact your friend and not someone else? And number two, that this friend of yours was in fact alive and not dead? Well, of course. And so that's the sort of situation that the apostles were in, if indeed we grant that the claims that we find in the Gospels actually derive from their testimony, which of course is something that has to be substantiated.
Actually, that's, I think, a core underlying claim here, that we can trust all of the as far as I understand, there's an event, the apostles and folks witnessed it. They transfer that to whoever authored the Gospels, and now you're reading that from the Gospels. And I think I would agree with you for the most part that it would be difficult to be honestly mistaken, for a group of people to be honestly mistaken about a claim of the nature that you're describing. But the fact that the Gospels are to be trusted just as a whole, I think that is a stronger core assumption here. So I'd like to explore that with you. You seem to feel that this is an assumption that you don't need to question. Does this apply just to the Gospels or to other historical written texts as well?
What do you mean? What does what apply to other historical texts?
The idea, I think the way that you phrased it, and correct me if I'm wrong, was that the authors are sincere in trying to purport what actually happened in reality. They're good documentarians, and therefore we should trust that the events that they describe are as happened to the best of the ability to describe them.
Yeah, so we have to evaluate this on a case-by-case basis. And so we have to look at the particulars and get into the nitty-gritty, into the weeds a little bit when we're trying to evaluate, are these documents that we find written by individuals who are close up to the facts and well-informed. And I would argue that this is certainly the case with the Gospels. Do you want me to give a few examples to justify that?
No, actually, my question was actually, we can go back to that though, sorry. My question was actually, is this something that you would, this kind of mode of thinking, something you would apply to other historical texts as well?
In principle, yes. We have to look at the particulars of the evidence and find out, okay, can we make an inductive case when? So basically, in broad outline, the way that I would make the case for the robust reliability of the Gospels and Acts would be to argue from numerous examples of claims in the Gospels, assertions in the Gospels that we can cross-check either internally or by comparing it with extra biblical secular sources. And so, yeah, that methodology in principle applies to other historical sources as well. I'm not doing something for the Bible that I wouldn't do for other historical documents.
So it sounds like you've validated the Bible through external evidence for the most part, and we're applying that validation to all claims within.
Right, both internal and external evidences. And we're focused here in particular on the Gospels and Acts because these are the documents that pertain to Jesus' resurrection specifically.
And I'm not saying it's the case, but if it could be shown to you that there was some element in there that was untrue, objectively untrue, would you still apply this principle to the resurrection claim?
So it depends on the nature of the point. So not all hypothesized errors are equivalent or epistemically equivalent. So there are some hypothesized errors which would be of more grave consequence epistemically than others. I do draw a distinction between, say, a deliberate distortion of fact versus a minor good faith mistake. And I don't think that a minor good faith mistake really seriously undermines the case for the robust reliability of the Gospels and Acts. I'm not an inerrantist. I do think that there is a handful of minor good faith mistakes in the Gospels. I'm happy to give examples if desired. No, not necessarily, unless you could show that the authors are deliberately fictionalizing entire pericopes or discourses or something along those lines, and that would catch my attention.
Right, and that's not my claim, actually, but it sounds like you're saying that if there was a significant discrepancy that was, impactful in some way, it would change your willingness to rely on the book. And again, I'm just trying to question the line of logic here. I'm not trying to say that that's the case.
Yeah, as I said, with the minor good faith mistakes, such as, for instance, a discrepancy on which day of the week an event happened on or something like that, then that doesn't, for me, seriously undermine the credibility of the Gospels. We find in other examples of very reliable testimony instances of minor discrepancies of that nature. So I think that it would be more of a problem if you could show that there were more major discrepancies that couldn't plausibly be explained by a minor good faith mistake or some sort of memory lapse or something like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I think so. Again, I don't want to mischaracterize you. If there was a major mistake that could be shown to be the result of extremely sloppy work, let's say, or just straight out deceit, that would change your willingness to rely on these texts, right?
It would reduce my credence, correct?
Yeah. And as a contrast to that, if there was another claim in the documents, let's say for some reason you're not aware of it, and it purports to say something that we have no way to verify, but it says that it's true. And we could say something like, the sky turned purple that day. Would you be willing to believe that if you had otherwise the same reason to believe that the document was true?
Well, there's an inductive argument, right? So if you have numerous examples of points in the Gospels and Acts, or for that matter, any source that you can cross-check and verify, that provides some reason to trust those sources on those details about that you cannot directly cross-check. In the all other things being held equal. Does that make sense?
I believe so. I think if you were to answer the question more directly, you would say yes. There's a lot of other truths in here, therefore you would take on the claim that the sky was purple that day.
So to be clear, I'm not saying that the numerous points of confirmation in the Gospels logically entails the veracity of every propositional statement contained therein. Rather, it provides an inductive basis for giving those sources the benefit of the doubt on the basis of their track record of accurate historical reportage.
Right. And again, I don't actually think that you believe this claim. I'm just trying to understand your application of this reasoning, if it would apply to another statement, which is I would consider to be extraordinary.
Yeah, so there's also a thing called epistemic routing. When it comes to the Gospels, and I think that we have really good reason to think that Jesus rose from the dead, that provides that renders the other miraculous aspects of the text at least plausible, say the virgin birth and other miraculous parts of the text. So does that make sense?
I'm really just hoping, and I don't like this form of question, but I'm hoping to validate your train of logic, and you've been implying to me, I think, that yes, but I would like to know yes or no. If it's stated within the section of the Bible that the sky had turned blue or turned purple one day, would that be enough justification for you to believe that that event had occurred?
Right.
Maybe that's a yes. I don't know.
Yes.
Sorry. Yeah, I was trying to give you more time there.
Yeah.
That is a yes then. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And just based on that, at this point, it sounds like it could say anything. And you would believe that to be true just based on its otherwise inerrancy?
I didn't say the Gospels are inerrant. I don't believe that they are.
Sorry, that's a shorthand for your maybe inerrancy is not the right word. Consistent accuracy is maybe a better term. Maybe you have a good phrase to capture that whole idea that I'm just not aware of.
What would be the good word? Is this a reliable account?
I think that they are strongly reliable. Yeah, I don't believe that they're completely inerrant. There's a handful of cases where I'm persuaded the best explanation is a minor good faith error. Happy to talk about those, but I find these sources to be very highly reliable.
If I can interject here just a moment to go back to
sorry, Quayd. I just want to finish up this line of thought.
Yeah, go ahead.
And then I'll be quiet because we are quite a few people here. This, to me, it sounds like even if there was within this text very strong evidence. If there was something that could prove it to be wrong by its otherwise kind of by the same logic that you are proving the resurrection to be true, that thing could be true. Like it would be impossible to show it to have been wrong for certain types of claims where there just is not enough empirical evidence. Like to me, that the sky turning blue or turning purple would be something that would reduce my faith in the text rather than the text to reinforce my to cause me to believe that had happened. But it seems like the logic only flows in the one direction here.
I mean, it depends. I mean, there are statements that might say parallel what you're talking about. For instance, in John 12, where there's a voice that comes from heaven saying, I have glorified it and I will glorify it again, speaking about God's name in answer to Jesus. But if we already have strong reason to think that Jesus rose from the dead, then that renders it plausible that these miraculous or supernatural aspects of the text that don't enjoy as strong direct support, it provides some justification for thinking those are also true.
Right. I'm going to hand it back to Quayd now because I promised I would.
So yeah, I think ultimately there will be some false analogy here, and I'm obviously wanting to hear any elaborations, but going back to the analogy of the rapist, certainly we would consider, and this has been a long conversation, so bear with me if I've missed anything, because I'm sure I have, but we know that the person who has been raped is well informed. They were obviously close to the event, right? That they have some justification for why they think they were raped. And there's also some risk involved as well, where it's obviously not in their benefit to report this, knowing the conditions. And so this is leading us to believe that really the most likely explanation may be that obviously she was correct. And again, we may even believe that event happened. And even given the circumstances, we might also think she may be correct if it's a close friend or something, like you were saying, right? If it's a close friend, I'm wondering if you found out that, like, you knew her as the type of person that even though she's generally well informed and seems like an honest person, you know she has a predisposition or she has some type of grudge against this person. Does this sway you in any direction in thinking she might not even realize that she's lying, but she has a proclivity to identify that person as the person, even though they didn't necessarily do it? Can this occur?
Sure, that's a factor that would be taken into consideration, right? We have to look at all of the evidence taken together. But if she's someone that has a track record of being honest and truthful, and she gives this very detailed report, gives and identifies someone that she knows personally, has known for a number of years, then I think that I would tend to favor the hypothesis that in fact she was raped by the said individual.
I guess I'm wondering, though, if it would still convince you if you, again, all those things are true, but you also know that with this individual person, she has a proclivity to think that they're bad, and that is her bias. Could this be an elaboration of her mind?
Again, that would be a factor that would be taken into consideration.
Okay. Right,
but it should be taken into consideration along with all the other relevant evidence, particularly if she's coming forward and is against her own self-interest to do so. Then that, in my opinion, also tends to increase the credibility of her case. So we have to look at all of the relevant factors together.
So there has been this consideration then that the writers, the proposed writers of the gospel would have a predisposition that Jesus would have been resurrected. Like they would have preferred that their friend be alive and not dead and be fulfilling the prophecies that he is supposed to fulfill.
Right. Although during Jesus' lifetime, the disciples didn't seem to get that Jesus was supposed to be raised from the dead. In fact, they didn't believe the women even after Jesus was raised from the dead, according to Luke. They didn't believe the women, for it seemed to them like nonsense. for instance. And of course, you've got the different sects within Judaism, none of which seem to be expecting a dying, much less rising Messiah. In fact, the Pharisees they believed in this general resurrection or mass resurrection at the end of the world, fulfilling Daniel 12, but not this single resurrection in the middle of history of one individual to glory and immortality. The Sadducees, of course, didn't believe in resurrections at all. And so it goes against the cultural expectations of the time. But in any case, I think that if this does really reflect their testimony, I think that the detailed nature of that testimony, coupled with the context of persecution, I think makes the resurrection hypothesis the best account of the data concerned.
I've been wondering, so you said before that this collection of statements, gospels, and acts they could either be correct, mistaken, or lying. Were those the options?
Right.
Would you be able to give the best evidence for it being mistaken or lies?
The best evidence for it being mistaken?
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Like, you've been giving us evidence of these gospels being the truth or correct, right?
Right.
But there's other possibilities.
Okay. So you want me to give the best counter arguments?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I think the best option that the skeptic has here when it comes to the resurrection is to argue that the accounts that we find in the Gospels and Acts don't actually reflect the statements of the original apostles. I think that if I were a skeptic, that's the direction I'd want to take the conversation. I think that the evidence is very good that these do in fact reflect the testimony of the apostles, but that would be the best option that one could take.
Fair.
From the audience, Pine Creek asks, would Jonathan believe that Jesus rose from the dead if he only had Paul's letters? If not, why not? I think means Paul said Jesus appeared to him.
I would not, and here's why. I mean, there are some Christian apologists who adopt what's called the minimal facts approach. Gary Habermas and Michael Licona and others have made this method popular. And basically, the minimal facts approach tends to limit the scope of one's analysis to the Pauline corpus, in particular 1 Corinthians 15:3-7. There's a number of problems, of course, with the minimal facts argument. One of them is that Habermas and Licona want to limit the data set to those facts which are, in their judgment, well supported by evidence, and then also are supported by more than 90% of contemporary scholars across the theological spectrum. However, the group experiences and the polymodal nature of the experiences are not a minimal fact by those criteria. So there's a little bit of a bait and switch that sometimes goes on where Habermas will be pressed on the some sort of objective vision hypothesis as an alternative to the resurrection, and he'll lean on the implausibility of group hallucinations, which is not part of his minimal fact data set based on his criteria. So there's a bit of a bait and switch at that point. Now, in terms of 1 Corinthians 15:3-7, we read, and thanks for bringing up on the screen. It says, what I received to pass on to you as of first importance, that Christ died for our sins in accordance with the scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day according to the scriptures, that he appeared to Cephas, then to the 12, after he appeared to more than 500 brothers at one time, most of whom remain until now, but some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James and to all the apostles, and last of all, as to one untimely born, he appeared also to me. The argument that Habermas and Licona and others put forward is that this is a pre-Pauline creedal tradition, which I think is quite probable, and that they often argue that it dates very close up to the time of Jesus' death and resurrection. I'm not so persuaded on that latter point. I have an essay on my website where I bring that into question. I think it's plausible that it dates that early, but we can't positively justify that. But I think that you have a stronger point from what Paul goes on to say in verses 9-11, where he says verse 8-11, he says, and last of all, he appeared to me as to one untimely born, for I am the least of the apostles, not even worthy to be called an apostle, because I persecuted the church of God. By the grace of God, I am what I am. This grace towards me was not in vain. For in the contrary, I worked harder than any of them. It is not I, but the grace of God that is with me. And then verse 11 says, whether then it was I or they, so we preached and so you believed. And so Paul seems to imply that his statements concerning the resurrection is in alignment with what's being asserted by those who were Jerusalem apostles, in particular Peter and so forth. And we understand that the Corinthians were acquainted with the preaching of Peter, because in 1 Corinthians 1 he mentions you have divisions and factions in their midst. Some say I follow Cephas and so on. And so the Corinthians are acquainted with Peter's preaching. So I do think that these statements in 1 Corinthians 15 concerning the resurrection actually do reflect what was being asserted by the Jerusalem apostles. However, the caveat I would put forward is that 1 Corinthians 15 does not tell us in enough detail what the experiences were like, what was their nature. And if we're not able to say what the experiences were like, it becomes very difficult to evaluate the rationality of the apostles' belief that Jesus was in fact raised from the dead. And so I think that in order to make a robust case for the resurrection, you have to really appeal to the Gospels and Acts and show that they are in fact reflective of eyewitness testimony.
Okay. Thank you. Now, to my ear, your sound has gone a little funky. Is anybody else hearing
Yes,
Jonathan's sound?
and it's a little bit hard to keep up.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, people sound messed up too. So,
I was wondering, thank you for all that. You've given us a lot to think about. I was wondering what would change for you if you found tomorrow that you maybe didn't believe this as much?
If I can't believe it as much, do you mean to the point that I don't think it's positively justified?
Yeah, if you discovered something tomorrow that just changed your mind to reduce your confidence in this, what would change for you?
Well, if it reduced my confidence to the point that it would be more likely than not that it's false, then I would need to revise my conclusions and cease being a Christian.
How would that change you or your life?
Well, I would have to give up my beliefs and my church affiliations and stop praying and all the things that are associated with the Christian life. So does that answer your question?
I think so, yes. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Jonathan.
Hey, great to see you.
I found it interesting that you wouldn't believe Jesus rose from the dead just based on Paul's letters. That's what you said, right?
Correct.
How about if you just throw in Paul and Mark? Would you believe it now?
I don't think I would. No, I don't think Mark gives us a sufficient detailed account of the post-resurrection encounters with the risen Jesus. I think that Matthew, Luke, and John are also needed to have a robust story.
Okay,
Not to say they're of no evidential value, but I don't think that they would be sufficient.
Okay, now we got Paul, Mark, and Matthew. Do you believe it now?
Yes, I think so.
Mm-hmm. So what tips you over the edge with Matthew?
Well, it's the detailed accounts, including the polymodal or multisensory nature of the resurrection encounters with the risen Jesus.
Okay. Now, you've heard my flying man thought experiment. If I gave you something similar for my ancestor who could fly unaided, I gave you something equivalent to Paul, something equivalent to Mark, and then this next diary in line has more detail of how he looked when he flew and where he flew and the people who saw him fly, then you would believe my ancestor flew?
Well, we'd still need to investigate the hypothesis that you're lying and making stuff up, of course. And now let me address your flying man experiment, because I've seen you present this quite often. I think that when it comes to Jesus' resurrection, I think that we have independent considerations that bear on Jesus' messianic and divine identity, and that provides an independent reason to think that God plausibly has motivation for raising Jesus of Nazareth specifically from the dead. And so that bears positively on the intrinsic plausibility.
But my ancestor did claim to be God. And so therefore there was a reason why God would allow him to fly.
It's not merely that Jesus claimed to be God, it's that there's good reason to think that he was in fact God.
Yeah, there's good reason to believe that my ancestor was God, yeah. Because we have...
I mean, you would have to get into the specifics.
If I gave you a text that actually said that he flew like something equivalent to the 1 Corinthians 15 creed, something equivalent to the Gospel of Mark. You said you would not believe Jesus rose based on that. But as soon as we get Matthew, we have a little more detail. If I give you a little bit more detail about my ancestor, would you believe he flew? Meaning that he did miracles, he claimed to be God.
We have to look at the hypothesis that you just made the whole thing up as well.
Okay. How would you rule out that Matthew didn't make up some of this stuff?
Well, we need to look at the various lines of evidence that support the sincerity of the apostles, including the context of persecution, the use of women as the chief discoverers of the empty tomb, which is surprising if they're just making stuff up. Why even use the women, of course, if you're making something up, because you're involving additional conspiracies.
Okay, let's take these one at a time.
If
I told you that my ancestor flew in front of women first, it was only women who saw him fly first, would you think it's more likely he flew?
Well, we have to look at the reason why the testimony of the woman carries evidential value in Jesus' case is because in the patriarchal society of ancient Israel, the testimony of a woman was not highly regarded.
Yeah, same here with my ancestor.
Male witness, and so that carries evidential value as far. I mean, if you're making something up, that's not a good apologetic move.
But it was same with my ancestor.
So
like,
you're basically just setting up
flew.
You're basically just setting up a situation that parallels.
Yeah.
You're basically setting up a situation that parallels essentially exactly the situation we have for Christian origins.
Right. So would you believe my ancestor flew if we had something similar to Paul, something similar to Mark, and then we throw in some more detail with Matthew? Would you believe my ancestor actually flew unaided?
In principle, if you had a sufficiently parallel
in principle, or you would believe it?
Well, we need to see the actual evidence. And you're talking about a completely hypothetical situation.
If you can imagine me actually presenting you texts that say this, would you believe my ancestor literally flew?
In principle, I could be persuaded if you had a sufficiently parallel set of data to the sort of data.
So you wouldn't believe it. You would just, in principle, you could believe it, but you wouldn't believe it.
If you had sufficient evidence, then yes, you could.
Yeah, but what's this? I've given you the sufficient evidence. I've given you something exactly like Paul, like Mark, and like Matthew, but I'm hearing you're not immediately believing it.
No, it's because you haven't actually given me the evidence.
But if I actually gave you words on paper, then
yeah, I could believe it. Yeah,
you would believe it then.
I could be persuaded. Yeah, if you give me the evidence. Yeah.
You could be persuaded, or you would be persuaded.
I would be persuaded if you gave me the evidence, right?
So all it takes is words on a piece of paper, and then you would believe it.
Well, you have to you have to investigate the evidence.
And how would you investigate that?
If your hypothetical situation is sufficiently parallel to what we have with respect to the New Testament, then yes.
Yeah, I understand that, but what I'm trying to figure out is at what point does your belief switch turn on with my ancestor? Like, do we need? It didn't really sound like if I added something equivalent to Matthew that you immediately believed it. There's something else going on here. What would you need to see with my ancestor? Would you need something equivalent to John, the Gospel of John, as well?
You would need to show that the testimony was such that it would be very difficult to be honest and mistaken about that. So you would need testimony of individuals who are close up to the facts and well informed, and preferably eyewitnesses, or at least those that had spoken to eyewitnesses.
So if I gave you texts that were written about 10, 20, 30 years after my ancestor flew, would that suffice?
Well, it depends on the particulars of the case. I mean, can we get back to talking about the real world?
I think the issue is here is that there's multiple things that he's relying on, and it's not going to be easy.
I know, but this is why I like the Flyman, because it forces Jonathan to focus, laser focus on each piece of evidence. And at what point does that belief switch turn on? With Jesus, Jonathan, it basically was with Matthew, and I'm trying to figure out why don't you believe Jesus rose from the dead from Paul and Mark? But as soon as we get Matthew, your belief switch turned on. Why?
Well, I told you. I told you, because in 1 Corinthians, we don't have a sufficiently detailed set of
but why does it turn on with Matthew?
Well, here we have a more detailed description of the sort of appearances that was involved.
Can something be detailed and be false?
Yes.
How did you figure out that the detail in Matthew wasn't false or more likely to be false?
Because, as I said, we look at the sincerity and so we look at whether they were sincere, and we look at whether they were lying. And if they're neither lying nor honestly mistaken, then that favors the hypothesis that they were in fact.
How did you figure out that Matthew was sincere?
I thought we've discussed this already.
Yeah, I think we did before Doug was on.
Okay.
Just in one sentence, how did you figure out Matthew was sincere?
Well, we look at the context of persecution. We look at the use of women as the chief discards of the empty tomb, which is found in all four Gospels. The fact that the Gospels are willing to use...
The first thing you said was persecution. How do you know Matthew was persecuted?
Well, we've got the context of persecution, that the early apostolic leaders were persecuted, and so the apostles and those who were the first evangelists who wrote the Gospels and informed the Gospel accounts were...
But Matthew put you over the edge. How do you know Matthew, who wrote the Gospel of Matthew, was sincere?
I was just saying, because of the context of persecution, the apostles took tremendous risks, voluntarily enduring sufferings and persecutions.
I think you're saying that pretty much all of them did, so you can take it that Matthew did?
I'm saying there's a context of persecution, and so if the Christians are being persecuted, among those that would be targeted for persecution would be the leaders in the early church, which would include the apostles.
Okay, so it was in the air, and you take it as that happened for Matthew, or at least well enough.
Right.
That
And so what justifies the context of persecution is the accounts in Acts concerning the persecution of the early apostles. Peter and John are specifically mentioned. You've got the stoning of Stephen as well, and so forth. You've got the letters of Paul, which also testify to the early context of persecution, and you also have extra biblical sources as well. First century.
Is the persecution thing can you imagine a case where there was zero persecution? Would your whole belief that Jesus rose from the dead be gone?
It would significantly reduce the argument for the
okay. So this is an important issue.
Yeah, and there would also be other considerations that bear positively on sincerity as well. But that would
about 50 to 100 to 150 years after my ancestor flew, there were traditions that highlighted how the followers of the flying man were persecuted and died for their belief that my ancestor flew. Do you believe my ancestor flew now?
Again, you're just trying to create this same scenario that we have for Christianity.
Yeah. Imagine. Use your imagination.
No fooling at all. That's exactly that.
This is exactly what I'm doing. I'm all my cards on the table. If I presented you with traditional texts dated 50 to 150 years after my ancestor flew that said that the followers of the flying man were persecuted and died for their belief that my ancestor flew, would you be more likely to believe my ancestor literally flew?
I don't want to put words in his mouth. Okay. All right. Yeah. I think
you would.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. And now what if I told you my ancestor didn't fly, but we still have everything, all these texts that said he did? How would you explain that? And even the text that says that the followers were persecuted. How would you explain that?
Well, again, we need to look at the evidence. Then it would be your testimony versus the other testimonies, and we'd have to find out which one is more likely to be credible.
No, how would you explain that my ancestor didn't fly, yet we have those texts that say he did in the persecution stories and everything?
We're just going around in circles here.
Well, here's an answer you could give. An answer you could give is because
have to change soon.
An answer that you could give is that they truly believed in the message of the flying man, and they wanted to promote this idea in order to get followers. And that maybe the people who wrote about it weren't actually the first person eyewitnesses, and these were stories that later developed. Those are possible answers you could have given with my flying man. Or that they blatantly lied and they were out for money. There's another explanation. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm gonna grab the horns of this whole thing and say, Dr. McClatchy, is there anything that we haven't asked that we should have? Anything that you'd like to say to us? And we'd like to give you the last word.
Well, thanks for having me on and for the interesting conversation. If you're interested in what I have to say about the Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, which is basically where Doug's flying man analogy is going. I have multiple essays on my website, jonathanmcclatchy.com. So yeah.
You talk about the flying man on your website?
I don't talk about that particular one, but I do cover extraordinary
okay.
claims require extraordinary evidence and similar illustrations. So
Thanks for talking with us.
Thank you.
Great
Dr.
conversation.
McClatchy, my email, if you don't mind, is jugglinglessons@gmail.com. Would you please send me that text of the links so that we can drop it in the description? We want to publish your links in our description. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you for coming. Spirit Man, you're up. I'm gonna put you up in the big corner where you can be talking to all the rest of us. And let me see if I can grab that. I'm getting behind on my clicky. There we go. Did I get your claim right? We can change the world and introduce a new world spirit in 26 days. If we introduced Hegel's science of logic for this God coherence, and I did edit there, so he was referring to this God coherence. Could you expand on that enough to make that make sense?
Yes, guys, thank you for having me on. It's my first time being here. I was actually told by a few people that I needed to come. Twice you guys have crossed my path in the last 2 or 3 weeks from the people that I've been talking to. And so I'm not sure what the format is, but yes, you did a pretty good job on the question there and my claim. And to expand it a little bit more, I ended up, I was studying philosophy for about 20 years now, informally and at university a little bit. And, when you're studying philosophy amongst different religions and a bunch of philosophers and, you're combing through history and you're sensing that there's some kind of essence, something that's reoccurring in anything that actually has truth or is considered a philosophy, right? And it endures in time. I had a profound experience with Hegel in the last couple of years. That was that experience multiplied by 1,000. And I call it this coherence. And so I realized that when we really truly study Hegel deeply and realize he's not talking meaningless verbiage, what he is saying is so incredibly profound that it literally could change the world and introduce what he calls a new world spirit by this kind of feeling of coherence that his science of logic has when you take it seriously. So after about 3,100 hours, I feel like we can discuss what he actually achieved in his science of logic in such a way that it could probably change the world and unite everybody in an incredible way that most religions call God.
Yeah, I don't have 3,100 hours. I don't even have 3,100 seconds. I think we have about
9 minutes.
100 to 1,000 seconds at most. We're willing to go a little overtime, but could you crunch the thing? What do I need to learn to understand and believe your claim? What do I need to? What reasons do you have? What knowledge do I need?
You need the science of logic. So Hegel wrote this text about 800 pages long, and he maps out in his table of contents the categories that we take for granted every day. And we don't ordinarily think that there's anything special about this at all. Never mind think that this is God, right? This incredibly profound. If you're an atheist, then it's just the truth. And so you look at it and like, well, what's so truthful about this? It's not hitting us in any resonant way that suggests anything incredible. So I think what we have to do is literally just teach people the science of logic in its full breadth, which means in its dialectical speculative nature. And then we can change the world, because all pain in the world is really just misunderstanding of our true natures as pure thought in its dialectical speculative philosophical form. We actually don't have real philosophy right now. That's one of my claims. We
don't have real philosophy now.
Yeah, we have abstract philosophy, not genuine philosophy.
I want you to pretend, just for the sake of argument, that I am better than average on logic. I know it's hard. Work with me.
I'm working.
But I'm better than average on logic. What is the thing that I need to understand the dialectical speculative nature of, and then I lost it.
What you need to understand is that even though you might be good at ordinary logic, it's still abstract logic, what Hegel calls the dead bones of logic. The only way you can truly grasp what he's saying is to grasp it in its universal concreteness. So you have to have universal grammar. That means the order of the categories have to apply to all other categories in a tremendous new level of coherence, which abstract logic approximates, but actually doesn't do a very good job.
I'm not holding on. The order of the categories has to apply to all the categories. What does order of the categories mean?
So if you read Hegel's Science of Logic, the thoughts that we have in our heads, we normally don't take in any kind of order. It's not like thoughts grow into each other like a plant, right? You just have thoughts that you subjectively, you interpret the world. But Hegel says no.
He's saying our thoughts come in parallel and they come in, but instead we need to have linear, and this leads to this, and this leads to this, and this leads to this. Okay,
yeah, you have a root thought in your mind.
Linear logic,
yeah,
or conditional logic based on prior somethings. Okay, I have some of that.
Do you?
Well,
you got some
I'm autistic, so I've got that kind of like really tedious thing going on. But assume that I, so could I assume that I already think in terms, when I'm trying to think in terms of this, then leads to this, then leads to this?
Well, it's very unlikely you have the universal logic, because you have to do that with the pure thought categories themselves. And when I read through history, no one even got close to doing that except for Hegel. So if you have been doing it, you're repeating what Hegel has done. But it's
I'm asking
really
you to do something completely impossible, and that is summarize this thing into a small section. So now I'm going to back away and say, ignore whether I understand it. But one of my tests when I'm trying to find out if somebody knows what they're talking about is I say, tell me your model, explain to me your model, and I keep asking questions until they either say I don't know, which is a great answer.
I love that.
Or I understand enough of what's going on. And either way, at the end of that, I want to say, and now what made you think that was true? So even if I take that thing across the side and I say, I don't even know what you mean, which is true, what convinced you? What was the thing that really made you sure this was true?
Coherence. So when I was reading it, the order that he puts the categories makes so much sense that you reapply it to literally everything in your life you've ever experienced, and it makes more sense. It's coherence. And it's a feeling you have in your inner world that corresponds with your outer world, but you can only really feel the coherence in your inner world just with the pure categories themselves.
Okay.
So we never think, oh, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, okay, go ahead, keep going.
So in religion, this is why religious people have a hard time articulating their experience of God or this beyond. They're really talking about coherence in the realm of pure thought when the categories are in a special order. That special order is their dialectical order, that where the categories think themselves.
Okay,
so
the order is really critical, and by order you mean the sequence, and not putting them in an alternate sorting arrangement. The sequence matters, and the sequence itself carries a more powerful algorithm, a more powerful way of thinking?
Yes.
Okay.
It's very efficient because you don't have to memorize all these different combinations. You memorize one order, and it applies to our own thoughts. It applies to everything in nature. It applies to everything in psychology. Everything that we have in epistemology follows this order over and over and over again. So once you memorize it once, you can recognize it everywhere in a tremendous fractal coherence. And that's the religious rapturous experience people get when they're in flow state, where they're having some kind of religious moment, whether they're in a psychotic break, whatever it is, they're losing touch with this abstract reality that we call ordinary linear thinking. And you get in touch with the true fabric of reality. And that's the only real way to prove that God exists, or this concrete totality, that's the theory of everything, is to have universal logic in that order. And Hegel gives it to us. And if we got people catching on to that, I think in 26 days, we could literally change the entire world, because we would understand the nature of our pure thought for the first time in 3,000 years. And we could actually start cooperating in a higher spirit. A tremendous new order of cooperation that wouldn't be coercive. It would be self-determining, because we're all this essence. We're all this logic at different stages of realization.
We're going way past the answer, and I want to allow the room for the question. I think CK
Okay,
was
sorry, go
asking
ahead.
if Hegel was the synthesis that. Tell me what you said.
The thesis, antithesis, and synthesis idea, is that Hegel?
You know
The
what? He
dialectic?
says it isn't, but it actually is. But yes, go ahead.
No, I love this because I don't know much about Hegel or this philosophy, but I've come to it myself as well through complex systems. And I don't know if you're familiar with Arthur Kessler.
No, how do I spell that actually?
Last name is Koestler, I believe, something like that. He has a great book called The Ghost in the Machine, which I really love.
Is it
And
based off the anime?
no.
Oh, okay.
It's more has to do with like the ghost in our mind or whatever, the machine behind us, basically. But yeah, I really like this. Would you say like progressive categorization of thinking?
Mhm.
I have this that I jotted down, and I don't know if this is super relevant or if it even makes sense.
Let me just take it. Okay, it says.
Okay, so down here, yeah, it starts from like stimulus, and then we get to our feelings, and then thoughts, and then we can form opinions, beliefs. It goes to knowledge, truth, and then fact, reality. Is that kind of similar?
It's kind of like that. You got a couple of categories backwards from Hegel, but yes, that's essentially
Okay.
what we're doing.
Interesting. I love this. I got into this. My mind started really churning after doing a lot of this SE stuff. And it seems like SE is kind of, I don't know, I feel like I just came on the show for the first time 2 weeks ago, and I held back because I felt like I was like enforcing my own philosophy. But the more that I've been listening to SE talks and stuff like that, it feels like it has a lot of this philosophy within it. And I hear it coming up in conversations too, because a lot of these SE practitioners, they talk about feelings versus thoughts. And so like emotion versus cognition, maybe. And then there's a level of interaction with our external world. So if I'm thinking of the right thing, I believe Hegel has this progression from our maybe primal feeling selves to our cognitive thinking selves, and then our outside external selves with our world.
Well, this is yes. So you're grasping the order, and I'm hearing here on the notes that it's too confusing to understand the claim. I guess to boil it down, we could just say first step is: do you think our thoughts are ordered in a specific way that is divine or absolute? And what you're talking about here is actually you're way a little bit too far. So when you're talking about feelings and thoughts, there's a whole bunch more that has actually gone on before we actually come onto the scene logically.
Sure.
Where you're talking about is what Hegel calls the phenomenology of spirit, where consciousness starts to form, and you start getting psychological, like finite human knowledge, which is a replication of what came before. But we're talking about the order of pure thought itself. That means you're not around to think it. The thoughts in our heads are objective. They exist in some supersensuous world where they're perfectly thinking themselves without any of our cognitive bias. We rethink them in broken, imperfect forms, kind of like Plato said. But when you grasp them in the right order, that's when you can actually see clearly. That's what clear thinking is. That's what philosophy is supposed to be. And you start off in these nascent versions of intuition, self-feeling, then what he calls actual soul, which is like habit. And then you get the notion. The notion is a universal for a universal. So repeat of this objective logic. That's what we are. That's what consciousness is. And then you develop into self-consciousness, and it keeps going. But yes, you have the concept of the importance of the order. And if the audience wants to pick up on this somewhere, it's so weird to think that our categories are already ordered and we are the disordered ones. It's so weird that you can debate that topic and say, no, our thoughts aren't ordered like some kind of plant where you have a first thought that grows into all of our other thoughts. That's crazy, right? I think Hegel's right. I think if we don't do that, we're going to continue to rip ourselves apart and maybe not reach civilization number 2, where we become like a galactic civilization or some kind of new spirit. And I want to say too, this isn't just religious. We're just making sense of what religion was trying to do logically. It's
Sure.
actually pure, genuine philosophy, where you separate sensuousness, particularity, sinfulness, from the pure thoughts themselves. When you grasp this objective logic in its purity, there's no sensuousness there. You can't taste it, touch it, feel it, nothing. This is pure thought in the medium of pure thought with no thinker except its own self thinking its own thoughts. We are a practical representation of this, but this exists before us. So that's what religion was trying to approximate. But now we're going to do it in a scientific form, which Hegel gives us, in an absolutely profound coherence that modern science is trying to put itself together to achieve. But it never will unless it grasps this order in the universal logic.
Mm-hmm. So what is this order?
It's really crazy, but if you just read Hegel's table of contents in the Science of Logic, that's the order. But you can't grasp the profoundness of it because it's moving. It looks like they're separate chapters, but when you read the movements, they're actually speculatively growing into each other in a way that you have to move yourself. They have to become determined by you to become actual. For you to have the coherence, you have to have the realization. That's why it has to be a direct connection within yourself. And he gives you the roadmap to think it yourself. And that's what I'm encouraging people to do now is Hegel wasn't reading meaningless verbiage. When you, spend a few thousand hours, it actually profoundly changed your life. And I think it's what we need in the world today if we're going to make these big changes very quickly. And I'm willing to teach it for free because I'm very concerned about where we're going in the world.
Please take down my email so that you can send me that link because we need to put this in the description. You're giving me a list. Oh, there's a concrete list. Yes, please. Maybe we have that. So jugglinglessons@gmail.com. Please send me that list and I'll pop it in.
I think you gave it to me. Yeah, I can send it to you. Sure.
Thank you.
So how is this order determined? Originally, like not us determining it.
Well, it just thinks itself from pure what I think Hegel calls absolute negation. So you can arrive at this place. It's only a formal beginning, though. The system that we're starting is actually always eternal. So it's always complete. So how do you begin eternity logically? It's a paradox, right? Well, Hegel solves that paradox in a formal way. He gives us an in into eternity by saying, basically, repeat what Descartes did. Negate all that your sensual data. Epistemologically, get rid of your sense, taste, touch, all the belief systems you structured while you were in space-time. Even negate space-time itself, because that's sensuous. Negate all the categories that you think you know. And what happens? You arrive at just thinking itself. I think, therefore I am, right? And so this is supposed to be, in Hegel's opinion, Descartes' attempt to reach the realm of pure thought, where thought starts thinking itself. So the I think, therefore I am is supposed to be pure thought thinking itself. That's why Descartes says, you can't trick me that I'm not thinking because I need to be thinking to know I'm being tricked. And he says that contradiction is what I can know. And that's the first moment of like speculative thought that a human being grasps in pure thought. So that's why Hegel says real philosophy, like genuine thought, or not genuine, abstract philosophy began with Descartes. Genuine philosophy starts with Hegel because he builds on that. But he says you can't stop with Descartes. He actually didn't go far enough. He actually still has an assumption there that's messing up his categories. So you actually have to go further. You have to be more skeptical than Descartes and actually get rid of the self itself. You don't need a self to think the categories. You get rid of yourself, you get rid of nature, you get rid of everything, and you end up with absolute negation, with everything canceled. Now, negation tries to cancel even itself. The only thing left to cancel is just canceling itself. So when it goes to try and cancel itself, and this absolute negation, absolute, it ends up in a contradiction, an ontological. You're not even there. This is not subjective. If you do this properly, you'd probably die in this world. But in some sense, this has actually happened in some ontological way, where this absolute negation negates itself, and it has nowhere to go because it's already negated everything. So what it does is it negates itself into an affirmative. But the affirmative has to be less than nothing. So what it turns into is what Hegel calls sheer immediate indeterminacy. It's so little, you can't even say what it is. It's just isingness. So you know something is there, but you can't say what it is. That's that ineffable Taoist kind of thing that we have, right? But incredibly, Hegel shows that the Tao, this ineffable, this first pure thought, speaks itself by just being itself. It negates itself. It doesn't know it's negating, but it's just the same logic moving through. its own content is pure nothingness. There's nothing there to know. And as soon as it realizes for itself that there's nothing there, it realizes that to know something is not there, it has to have being again. So it flips back and forth instantaneously as one thing that is two things, one thing that is two things. So you have this speculative moment, this contradiction. You have two things that's one thing. And it's pure being and pure nothing flipping back and forth. But then when you realize that, or when it realizes that, it takes that reference and makes it explicit. It's not adding anything. It's just realizing that there's two things there that's alternating, and that it is itself. Then it has two of those moments alternating, and that's what pure becoming is. So pure becoming is the sublation of that first abstraction, and then that sublates itself into the first stable thought, which he calls determinate being. So this is just the first couple of categories of pure logic thinking itself purely objectively. And he says it's just following its dialectic, just pure opposites turning into pure opposites. And he says if you can get rid of all your baggage, you can retrace those steps. And he said that's what he did. But he said he kind of cheated because he actually surveyed all of human history, 3,000 years of philosophers, and he discovered that this order in our pure thoughts is actually the exact same order in history. It's what he calls spirit is actually developing itself, purifying itself from contingent human history to achieve this reunification back to that order as thinking self. The inward world reunites with it in this coherence, right? So he said he cheated a bit, and he took what categories that he recognized in each philosophy, and that's how he was able to rebuild it. And then he used Aristotle's universal form of reason, the syllogism. He says the syllogism is the universal form of reason. It's the form that you can apply to everything. That's the triad: synthesis, or thesis, synthesis, thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. And he says if you do this in a living way, not a dead way, not in this abstract way, but in this right order, he says that's when you know something is scientifically true. And that's where I think we need to begin, is understanding the order.
Yeah, I don't know if we have to cut this short, but I can talk about this stuff forever. This is what I'm into, and it's really intriguing. I just want to ask one quick question. Do you find any like crossover with quantum theory?
Yeah, actually, quantum theories. Go ahead.
Like superposition of the selves and being, and then the coherence.
I think Hegel beat us there. I think he beat us there 200 years ago. Yeah.
Interesting.
It's incredible.
It's pretty. Well, I was going to say it's pretty broad. Like it seems like it would take more than like a 20-minute conversation to really, because I think the thing that people are talking about, I'm connecting some of the pieces too, and I've read Hegel in like snippets. So I think it would be interesting to have more dots connected on this, maybe on a future show or something, if you ever get the opportunity to come back.
Yeah, we don't have enough time to actually get to the end of this.
Well, maybe I can say a quick word. That's kind of what happens. It's an abundance, right? We're opening a new door.
Spearman, I'm really interested to hear what you have to say, but we really do need to cut this short for today. We appreciate you coming on and sharing your thoughts. Maybe we can try again on another day and get more into why you believe this is true and how you came to this claim and what would change for you if you didn't believe this. But for today, I just wanted to say thank you for participating, and thank you to everyone for chiming in. It was an interesting call-in show.
Thank you. Send me that email. I will share it with all the people because I think one or more of us would really like to set up like a one guest show for this, because this is too broad, too deep. No, one of those terms. For the call-in show, we don't have the time and attention to make it happen. Maybe it's the attention span. Like that.
Still a great conversation, though. By the way, still
totally. I'll message you 100%. I'll send you right away. And I'm actually teaching like a Sessions of Spirit to help people get into it on YouTube, so you can check it out there. I got 20 sessions to help get us into it, but I totally understand, and I would love to come back.
Nice.
Thank you much.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you,
and with that, thank you all for coming. Thank you, everybody in the audience, for showing up for this lovely little discussion of interestingness. And we'll be here next week, same time. During the week, we've changed our midweek call-in show to be a floating thing, depending on when people are available and trying to find out when the whole thing is best for the audience. But we're holding the Saturday. We're holding that one still. Got our thumb stuck on the calendar so it doesn't move. So Saturdays at noon Pacific, because I'm being all West Coast centric, 3 p.m. Eastern on Saturdays, and middle of the night in Europe or something.
Yeah, Justin, I am still thinking about your claim too, so I hope we can come back to that at some point in the future. I think that ended abruptly and unfortunately.
Yeah, Justin, we just cut you off. Bah! We'll just have to trust that
That's
you can
fine.
bring it back later.
But I got it written down, so it's in my mind.
Excellent. So, thank you, everybody. Goodbye. Oh, does anybody else have anything you want to end out with? You want to promote something? You want to talk about the thing? Okay, everybody, wait. Bye.
Okay.
Have
Thanks,
a
y'all.
good day.